Clint emailed me that he will not be making it tonight. So I think everyone who was planning to be here is here. So let's go ahead and get started. Sign-up sheets are going around. Did you guys get this?
Yeah,
in? Okay. All right. So let's begin with the approval of the November 23rd minutes.
Madam Chairman, in a moment I will ask to make a motion for the minutes.
Okay.
But I inspected the last meeting I was at, which was 2 minutes ago. I inspected those minutes, and I inspected the draft minutes for this meeting, and I saw no information as to the resignation of our valuable team member, Adam Weigel. And I want to say that I'm very sad that I'm sad that Adam's no longer a member of this team, although, you know, to kind of use a mortician's language, he's gone to a better place. I don't know. So I'm happy for his professional advancement, but I'm sorry he's not with us anymore. But I would like the minutes, if it can't, I don't know what the Robert's Rules of Order say, but who was present for the last meeting doesn't say anything about Adam. I think it should say something that Adam resigned to take a position with the city, or whatever the appropriate language would be.
Okay.
With such an insertion, I move that we approve the minutes as drafted for the last meeting.
So we have a motion to approve as amended.
Second.
Second from Charlie. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, let's talk a little bit about tonight. We're getting to a point in our deliberations where we need to start to really make some decisions so that we can refine our recommendations in the rest of our report. And so we've asked Sheila Shockey to come back and facilitate a discussion. And I think in my email to you, I said that one of the things we want to do is go over the draft recommendations to see where we have agreement, where we have some agreement but need some modification, and where we have enough disagreement that we should eliminate a particular recommendation. We also tonight want to spend some time talking about funding. I've given Sheila some questions to pose to the group. They have to do with things like, you know, the types of taxes that we're looking at are, you know, property tax and infrastructure sales tax. Are we really moving forward with both of those, one or the other? And another key question, which we haven't discussed at all, and that is, with whatever funds are available, how should the funds be allocated between the walking and wheeling environment and the bicycle environment? We haven't addressed that question at all, and I think we should. So that will be part of our discussion this evening. Then we'll talk about next steps and what we need to do to come up with another draft. Any questions at this point? Okay, hearing none. Sheila, why don't you come on up?
Hello, everyone. It looks like you've made a lot of progress. You've got a pretty large document that you've been working on, and if it pleases the group tonight, I thought we could start on page 18. And rather than kind of go through the findings, we would go through more and spend time on the recommendations. And as Marilyn said, we would go through each one and decide on not so much the specific language that's underneath each item, but maybe the bigger text, and make sure that we agree to that first. And then if we have comments we want to add in, so that the group that's drafting the recommendations document can consider how to incorporate those in, we could do so. But I think, first of all, trying to get through the recommendation, the big picture recommendations, and see where we have agreement would be the way to go. So if that pleases the group, I think we'll go ahead and start with page 18. And I'm going to kind of take notes on this document. It's not going to be the document as you would have it for recommendations, but just so you can kind of see that I'm listening and I'm considering what you're talking about. And if you want to think further about it, it's still in there. And I'm just wondering if you can see the larger text there. If I make it that big, does that look good to everyone? Can they see that? A little bit more? Okay. Okay, does that look good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so recommendation number 1, recognize sidewalks as a public good. The idea here is that they're a vital part of the transportation system and they require maintenance and new investment. Any opposition to that recommendation? Yes.
It really doesn't seem like a recommendation at all. There's no action required.
Okay, so more of a, it's more of a statement.
philosophy, yeah.
What
Right.
would the action be with it?
So you could say that recognize sidewalks as a public good and fund them because they require maintenance and new investment or something like that. Invest in them or something, would that work?
I mean, I think this is getting to the heart of, are they responsibility of the property owner or of taxpayers? And our recommendation gets to the idea of sharing it. So,
Yes, so
Kinda
number
like-
2 is you're sharing the cost, right?
yeah, it's kind of like, one is implying something, but then we backtrack a little bit to say it's a public good, but we're going to pay for it in part, partially we pay for it privately. So,
So you could say that recognize sidewalks as a public good, and you could go into, rather than say how they're paid for, but that they should be well-maintained and invested in, rather than say who, and then the next recommendation is who. Would that get at it?
I think one question we need to answer is, does the group task force want to discuss, should it be a cost share or should it be city, public city funded? I think that's one question that we have tonight. I mean, answering that answers some of these other questions. And I do see what Charlie's pointing out with one, if it is a public good, and it's a it is public infrastructure like streets are, those are all shared by everyone through property tax or sales tax. Then if you do have a cost share, as we have in number 4, or well, the cost share model number 2, and then in number 5 with the maintenance of them and the percentage, and that, I think that's a question. So if it's
it provides the sort of talking point that I think is needed to start identifying the kind of irony of it is a public good. We all think of it as that in that way. Yet then we ask people to pay for it privately, which is not typically how you think about public goods. I mean, it's not entirely true because during development, generally that cost is ultimately borne on the property buyer. So it's not, a lot of new development is kind of privately paid for, even though we end up all using it. That's a little nuanced.
So maybe a better statement would be recognize sidewalks as a vital part of our transportation system. and then you talk about how you're cost sharing it.
There's no explanation of what the cost sharing means. This is not at all
I agree.
clear to me what that would be.
I agree with that there needs to be a better preamble definition of the existing payment or existing funding mechanism and this funding mechanism we're calling cost sharing. And I have to take a little bit of issue with the language Charlie's using, because other than federal deficit spending, all taxes come from private. They come from private wealth, whether they're business taxes or income taxes or property taxes. That's private wealth that the government takes, and then applies as the government sees fit. So I don't know that private is the right word you want to use there. The only public thing, the public power that the federal government has that Kansas and Lawrence don't have, is that they can create money, fiat currency.
And I think public
That's-
good is
that's
just
public.
public good is a recognized term.
No, public good
I
is
think
fine. What
people
you're
know
talking
what
about
that means.
private funds.
Well, when it's paid for through public funds that are raised by taxing
The
private
taxing-
owners.
taxes start as private money. They come from
I'm not
private
interested in
wealth.
getting into this, Mike.
Well, let's go back to the first, let's just focus on number 1 and not look at number 2 for just a second. So the first question, or first statement said, this does not seem like a recommendation. So,
I like the statement a lot.
Yeah.
right.
It's a philosophy. I do not think it's a recommendation.
And my thinking, when I wrote this section, I didn't write it in bullet points, I wrote it in paragraphs. And so then, as I was attempting at the last minute to sort of put it all into the great format that Marianne kind of started for us, I basically just took the topic sentence from each paragraph and threw it in as a recommendation. So I'm not sold on it being a recommendation. I don't think that's maybe so important, but I agree with Charlie that what we're asking people to do is change a mindset a little bit. And if you don't change the mindset a little bit, it's hard to understand 2, 3, 4. So that was, but if it would fit better as part of the introductory paragraph.
I think it's more of a preamble type statement. I don't think anybody has any huge philosophical problem with number 1, but it's a preamble rather than an
Did you
action.
have an edit to it?
Well, I just think that, I like that sentence too, and I think the recommendation, that sidewalks as a public good could be in the paragraph, and the recommendation could be what we kind of got at just a minute ago, as far as recognizing sidewalks as part of the transportation system. That the recommendation is that sidewalks be recognized as part of the transportation system, and that, in explaining that concept in that paragraph, it could, further elaborate by saying sidewalks are.
We certainly could refer to it as we go through the
Yeah,
other recommendations.
Right.
I like your wording, part of the transportation system.
Did I hear someone say that we're not nitpicking on the vocabulary right now?
Correct.
So
We'll get to nitpicking.
But I think that's that makes it more of a recommendation, is your, maybe your recommendation is to shift the thinking, or we need to think of some other way to say that to get to your point where it is actually a recommendation.
I don't see this as a recommendation. This seems like it's watered it down. If Joe Public read what you wrote now, they'd probably say, yeah, it's already recognized it as part of the transportation system. The thing to get to the idea of what's the actionable recommendation, it would get back to the ordinance sort of conforms to the state law, which is private residents are responsible for the adjacent sidewalks. So if we want to get to like an actionable recommendation, it would be to somehow alter the city code to clarify that it's not the private property owner's sole responsibility.
Well, and we need to get close to that in these cost-sharing recommendations below. Let me tell you where I'm coming from. I went through all the recommendations, and as much as I could, I tried to parallel cycling with walking. And we should either put them for both or neither as recommendations, I think. But then I was looking at other recommendations that I thought paralleled with cycling, and I didn't think we wanted to list all that long. So that's when I started thinking, well, number one really should be part of the paragraph, the intro, and then we can refer to it as needed under our other recommendations. So I was kind of looking at the total package.
So how do we want to handle that? Do you want it to be a recommendation, or do you want it to just be like an introductory statement to, and then specifically what are the recommendations that you're asking them? Which number 2 is more of a specific recommendation.
I think
Number
we
3
can,
's-
sorry.
Go ahead.
I think we can put it within the introductory text and still highlight it using typography or whatever so that it stands out. And I would propose that we try that for the next draft. And then
Okay.
if there are continuing concerns, we can address them then.
Okay.
Is the shift or the move to a different model that we're talking about in number 2, is the idea that we want Lawrence to utilize its discretion permitted under state law to go to this partnership model of paying rather than just having it attached to the property owner, and the property owner, it's now property owner and the city? And the sources of funds available to the city at large. Now, some of those might be federal funds, some of them might be grant funds, some of them might be whatever. Sorry, Mary. I'm done.
Okay.
Sheila, I think it would be helpful to me, and I don't know if others, but before just like digging into each recommendation and kind of figuring out how we think it should be better, to kind of take a step back and say, okay, what are the, instead of like exactly what the recommendation is, what is the recommendation going to cover? So do we want one recommendation about the sidewalk maintenance? Do we want one recommendation about, you know, I'm not sure.
Who pays for it?
Yeah.
Is that kind of like
Yeah,
what your
like,
charge
what are the,
is on
what are
your-
the big things
your
that
charter?
we want to be recommending without the specifics? Does that make sense?
Well, you could use the journalist model of who, what, when, where, why, how, and just answer each one of those. Okay, the what, in this case, is sidewalk maintenance. And then, try and answer the other 4 parts of that as a journalist would. And some of them may be obvious and would just require a single sentence, and some of them may require some additional language.
So could we start with the sidewalk and the pedestrian items and just kind of look at the items that are left here? So we have this, you want to move to a cost-sharing model, so like how you're going to pay, or who pays for it, so there's your who. How is it going to be done, more proactive? What's the priority, school routes, and then how is it going to be paid for? That seems to be kind of the main guts of that. And then the 5th one is the pursue a walk-friendly community designation, which is the recognition. So are there pieces missing on that? How is it going to be funded? Who pays for it?
I think it just, it feels like they're separate things, but they're all, at least 2 through 5 are really the same recommendation. It's just the different components within it.
And actually, my preference is to have fewer recommendations versus long lists. So if what you're suggesting is maybe we sort of bunch things together, so that everything that's related to, this cost-sharing thing is one, everything that's related to whatever else is another. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
So, Go ahead.
I don't know that we have an agreement on what kind of cost sharing we want to. I'm not exactly clear what that means, and I don't think we've
Right.
decided this is how we want to do it.
Right, and we're getting to that. Right, we were just discussing kind of more of organization of the document right now.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate with you guys a little bit. I think if you try to combine these, there are different things. One is, the first one, move to a cost-sharing model, is who pays for it. Two is how proactive your program is. Right now, it's complaint-driven. So if you try to combine those two, they're actually two separate things. It's how you run your program and how you and who pays for it. And then really the third biggest component is how is it funded? Does that make sense?
Yes, but you can't do one without the others.
Right, so maybe that's in order, is maybe the order's not right, so proactive maybe would be the first one. And then cost share, and then how to fund it, would that make it more logical?
Yeah, I'd start, if we're gonna do cost sharing, I would begin with that before we talk about proactive enforcement. Because people are gonna get up in arms when you start saying we're gonna aggressively enforce the code. I mean, I'm also wondering how we're gonna pay for that. Is it gonna cost a lot of money just to be more actively enforcing it? And then is that an additional staff member? Like, what does that look like to be proactive? That's what Ann Arbor did for several years, and I mean, what I got was it didn't work for them.
What didn't work?
Being aggressive in codes enforcement, ultimately they went to recognizing it as a public good and paying for it. And putting it to the voters.
So far I'm hearing we don't agree on the cost sharing model, and we don't agree on proactive approach to compliance, right? So there's not agreement on that. And so you probably wouldn't agree on where to start, safe routes to school, because you don't want to cost share. And then we haven't talked about how to pay for it yet. So maybe we should start with 5. Do you want to pursue a walk-friendly community designation?
Yes.
Do we like that one?
Yes.
Okay, let's clap. We got one. Yay! Okay, let's do that one. Do you want to move that one up instead of having that at the bottom, since that's kind of an overarching, that kind of goes with your preamble a little bit? Or is that something that you think is a more minor?
I mean, to me,
I think it's the end.
it's a recognition. It also is a goal-setting tool,
Okay,
but in some ways, it's a recognition of that we've done all these other things.
okay, sure.
I
So,
think it's
I don't,
best at the end.
yeah, I think
Okay.
it's okay where it is.
Okay.
Maybe we should go back and talk about what we do agree on. And I think, we had a priorities committee, and that committee, in terms of the walking environment, walking/wheeling, said that the priority should be on safe routes to school.
Okay.
Do we have agreement on that?
Well,
Well, we opened it up a little bit, like the neighborhood, like making it more about walkability in neighborhoods, which includes the schools, but it could also mean other.
Right.
okay, well, Charlie, you're welcome to bring a new idea in, but you started the conversation with what the prioritization committee did. Okay?
Right.
What the prioritization committee did was say the routes between home and school. And I argued that we should not use the name of the program that the grant is funded under, that it's the routes between home and school, that's the priority. Okay, now, if somebody wants to argue it should be a different priority, a more expansive priority, fine. But what the committee came up with is route between home and school.
Right, and then the task force discussion, by the end of that discussion, we acknowledged there was 2 pieces. So that's what I left that meeting with.
Yeah, and maybe we say the second priority is other neighborhood destinations. But as I was looking at this whole document, it feels a little bit like a family with a budget, and they have this huge wish list, and then they start to see how much money they have, and then the wish list gets pared down. So I think it's important for us to absolutely say, if we can only do one thing, this is the one thing. And if we can do two things, then this is what we would add. And that way, if there's not very much money available, we at least know
Right.
where that little bit of money would go, if that makes sense.
And you also have on here the installation of ADA compliant ramps. So if you had $1 to spend, where would you spend it first? I guess would be the question that we
I
would.
really don't see the need to keep that separate. ADA ramps are a given, they're already required by law, and they should just be incorporated with whatever the Public Works is doing.
But I don't know if this ADA, if this is all ADA ramps, for all ramps, or just the ones on the safe routes?
I think this is just the ones on the safe routes based on the data that was put together.
Okay.
Well,
The 6.3.
This is just based on the 51 miles of those routes, the cost, and what's included in those repairs.
The big ticket, like it's up to 6 million, is there's one option to put sidewalks on both sides of the street if it's a safe route. And that's about 3 million. My thought is I'd rather see the ADA compliance citywide be resolved before we put in a second sidewalk on a safe route.
Okay, I think we're getting
Well,
a
that's-
little bit toward the detail, and what I was just trying to say is, can we agree that safe routes to school is the top priority? Then let's decide kind of what is under that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I'm agreeing that the routes between home and school, which is the language the subcommittee presented.
Yeah, and Mike, I just think Safe Routes to School is the name of a program, but it's also a recognized term in our community, and I think it would be very awkward to not use it.
The biggest difference, I think, in what Mike is saying is he's saying routes from home to school. That is literally every street to each school in each neighborhood. Whereas what this is written as is the proposed 51 miles of safe routes to school prioritizes those routes to schools where there's the most influx of students to be impacted on their route to school.
Right.
So it's taken that routes to school and said, here's the highest density of trips of routes to school.
Oh, okay, I understand that there's been some work done under the grant to do exactly what you just said, Jessica, and that's pretty good work, although it doesn't work well out where I live because there are subdivisions being built and there aren't any, there isn't any thinking done about the subdivision that was built since the grant was granted. That's obvious to me. So that's a minor nit though, okay? Prioritizing the routes. We want to say the routes that were prioritized under the Safe Routes to School grant, that's fine. But where do we start? It's between home and school. That's the
So how many
umbrella.
miles is that? I mean, here's 51 miles, but you're
Yeah.
saying something else.
If we do home and school, it's every kid to every school. That's not what we're saying.
Well, it's not every kid to every school. For example, the school district has to provide transportation for kids beyond a
Okay.
certain radius, so.
Within those.
Okay, within the radius, okay, I'll take the point, but I'm
My
just.
take on it was that if you use the safe routes to school, everyone already has a preconceived idea of what that's going to be, and it may be limiting.
But on the good sense, the city and the school district and the health department have already put in significant effort on this, significant. And they together have identified these routes as being where the most density is. And if we can't do everything, to me, it makes sense to.
That's a great starting point, the 51 mile, that's a great starting point. I'm not liking the label. And I'll just shut up now.
I think the
I'm
key
down.
point here is it says phase in, and that's what we're trying to do is identify a priority that we can start with. But I think somewhere in the paragraph, and we talked about that at the task force meeting a little bit, I think, about the, this is the starting point. We're not saying this is the only thing we want to have happen, but this is a place to start. And 51 miles is a lot, so, to probably add $6.3 million, so So I think it's a great place to start, and emphasizing the phasing in and making sure that, I mean, with all the other data that we have in terms of what those gaps are in the community, and that information included, that point can be made that this is not the only need out there, that this is where we start.
Yeah, I like the concept that whatever we propose can be an ideal that will take maybe decades to reach, because really it's kind of setting forward an approach for the city to take when they decide to take on projects. And so if we have a big ideal like, our community will be a gold walk friendly community, but right now, let's start by, doing the sidewalks to schools and the safe routes to school. So it's kind of a short-term, long-term,
Maybe one of the ways we might be able to address this a little bit is, because under the gold designation, we don't say anything yet about what that takes to get that designation. And I think if we elaborated on that a little bit, that would convey, this is really the, more of the endpoint.
How about if we add this? So we're talking about the priority is to phase in cost sharing model by beginning with safe school routes. That's the 51 miles. And that eventually we would like sidewalks from all homes to schools and to other neighborhood destinations. Something that's more, like you're saying, short-term and long-term. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I don't want to upset anyone by this comment. And I think that the safe routes to school is really important, and that is a good thing, especially because the city's already working on it. But I think that other nodes are very important too, like grocery stores, places where people need to go for essentials that are close by. So a similar approach to, the radius of the safe route to school, the radius for, central areas that people will walk that far to get to somewhere. Because I think someone's gonna walk a quarter mile to get to the grocery store before a kid's gonna walk 2 miles to get to school in the morning. I don't know, I find that is more important. So I'd like to add something about like nodes within the city.
Well, Mary, I mean no disrespect to your argument. I just want to explain that when we were starting with the prioritization of schools, we're talking about the idea of vulnerable or disadvantaged users. We had a big discussion about which term, vulnerable, disadvantaged. If you look in all the engineering documents and talk about children and elderly people are the 2 biggest classes of vulnerable or disadvantaged users. Those are the folks you have to design for. And because we're talking about schools, talking about school-age children is specific language from 7106. That is something that goes right back to our, our document, that chartering document for us is school-age children has to be a focus. So that's why I would argue that we need to stick with the schools as the priority. Certainly, we want to make it easier for people to walk to the grocery store or walk to their doctor or whatever. Yes, that's a public good, not disputing that. But we have to start somewhere, and we started with the idea of vulnerable to disadvantaged, and kids being the one that we're focusing on first. That was kind of the discussion in the prioritization committee.
So if we have the safe routes to school as one way to start phasing in something, and we had 2 activity areas as another bullet. If we had more than one bullet and they're out doing some street, they could say, okay, we're going to pick this line because we're already doing this street. Maybe we should put more than one bullet.
I'm okay with that.
So does that address it if we kept the first priority is the safe routes to school, the 51 miles of proposed routes. The second priority is to build and maintain routes that connect people to essential services and activity areas. And then eventually we would like sidewalks from all homes to schools and other neighborhood destinations.
That's fine by me.
Yeah.
We're not getting into that. I mean, this seems like it's just nice words, but we're not actually saying, here's how you should fund this other stuff, right?
Right.
I mean, we're not getting into, and it's gonna cost another 8 million to do that, or 20 million.
Well, we're going to have to get to that.
Okay.
Right, and so I think, what you're going to want to do is to, do, in your recommendations, if you're going to start with priorities, you're going to want to have a funding package for what you say the first, your first priorities are. And then I think it would be probably unrealistic with the revenues that you have to say, we're going to do the plan that's this big, right? Because you already have the big plans, you don't have the money to do it, so.
Well, I'm kind of curious, the pedestrian plan that Jessica, you're looking at, is it going to conform to this, or is it going to speak more like arterials need to have sidewalks, and that estimated cost would be?
So that's how it's written now, based on the safe routes to school as priority one from what we heard from the community, to arterials and collectors. And then connect the third part is all the connections to transit, like from the fixed route pedestrian accessibility study and some other things like that, like thinking about crosswalks and stuff like that. So when you're talking about coming up with cost estimates from these to determine what is the second priority for what are the sidewalks, their routes that would be determined for essential services and activity areas, there's no map to show what that is. So it would be very challenging to come up with a cost estimate because there's no way to, I mean, it hasn't been those routes haven't been identified in that fashion.
But we do have a cost estimate on installing
Arterials.
sidewalks on arterials where there's a missing sidewalk.
Arterials and collectors, yeah, and you've seen that stuff because Carol put together those more detailed cost estimates for those.
And most essential services are probably located on arterials, so
Yes, because
I think that's a better, more specific. If we're gonna get into saying what's next, I would suggest we look at the pedestrian plan,
Use
which
the
is
same language.
drafted, and just try to say, we want to prioritize schools, but then second thing is we want to get all arterials to have sidewalks on one side, or I don't know what the cost is for 2 sides.
I don't know.
I don't recall that. But that feels like we already have a cost. You could probably say how many miles of sidewalk that is.
Yeah, this will be challenging to know the whole picture besides to say, here's what the safe routes to schools is, and then here's both your second and third priority, here's a total cost. We could kind of do that. That would
Yeah,
be.
we've got all that.
What?
We've got
Yeah,
all
we
that
would be
down.
able to do that now, but we wouldn't, between your second and third priority, we wouldn't, at this point in time, have those routes identified to be able to give you cost estimates for those.
Well, and that's where I think, one of our recommendations is a permanent advisory structure. And I think there are going to be times in this process where we're going to have to say, yeah, and on, something like future priorities would be discussed with this group or something like that, because, yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense to say our priority is everything. I think it makes sense to say eventually, and maybe we say eventually we would like sidewalks from all homes to schools, blah, 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 and then you can say this would be advising on this would be an appropriate role for the Citizen Advisory Committee.
One thing I haven't discussed, at least in the meetings that I've attended, which is all except the last one, is perhaps in 20 years, we're going to have almost all autonomous motorized vehicles. And that might make the answers different than where we are today, where we have driver-operated vehicle, automobiles and trucks. If we're in an autonomous environment, the autonomous engineering controls may solve a lot of the things we're trying to solve right now by separated lanes and bollards and all of that. So yes, in the future, there's going to be new facts. There's going to be new construction in town. There's going to be this whole new technology of autonomous vehicles. And the advisory structure to have to say, hey, we kind of need to go back and look at what those people talked about in 2015 and do course correction based on the new facts. And I think that's entirely reasonable to grant that advisory group that charter.
Okay, do we like this then? The first priority is the safe routes to school. The second priority are routes along arterials and collectors that connect people to essential services, transit, and activity areas. And eventually, we would like sidewalks from all homes to schools and to other neighborhood destinations. This would be an appropriate topic for a future advisory committee.
I think that's enough that we can, that's enough to get what recorded, what we've talked about. And then we
Okay.
can tweak it if we have to.
Okay. Do we want to go to funding next, or do we want to go to cost sharing and proactive approach to property compliance? Maybe start with proactive approach. Rather than being complaint-driven, the approach would call for staff to contact and work with citizens to achieve compliance.
Again, I mean, in kind of response to what you said about Ann Arbor, Charlie, I would love for that to be 100% city funded. What I'm trying to do is, I'm always thinking about political feasibility. And I don't know if we can go from this way to this way in one big step. So to me, the cost sharing is a way to start moving in that direction.
I agree.
It is
I'm not,
cost sharing.
I think there's a separation we need to make with cost sharing versus the proactive enforcement. Because you can have, you know, the complaint-driven process, and then you offer to share that cost. So you say here, you know, you have so many days, or however the letter goes. Say the city has a cost share of 40% or 60%, however you want to say it, and there's funding available. So it would still maintain the current process of, you know, this cumbersome complaint-driven two-notice or second complaint kind of, I mean, all that stuff.
The thing is, if you're gonna go to a cost, I mean, we wouldn't get much farther if we did cost share, if we didn't become more proactive about it.
Yeah.
Then it's just like, okay, now you're only having them pay half and they don't want to pay it, so they're doing nothing. To me, these things go together. If you're gonna offer the homeowner a partnership, then they have to hold up their side of that partnership too. What, in terms of cost sharing, what we discussed, and it's been probably several meetings ago, were communities that that essentially split the cost of the sidewalk with the homeowner based on some formula, and it can be means-based, so that someone who's very low income may, I don't know, may not have to pay at all, or maybe pay 10%. And to the point where someone who is very high income would be asked to pay the entire amount on their own. I mean, that's kind of what I'm thinking. So that you're providing incentives that sort of fit the financial situation of that particular group of homeowners.
To me, that doesn't fit with recognizing sidewalks as a public good.
Yeah.
It's not.
So maybe another approach would be to think about, why is the current approach not working? And one piece might be because there's not enough staff to go out and do the codes enforcement proactively. But the other thing might be just the political challenge of stepping up that enforcement. Like, the pushback could be significant. And why is that pushback happening? It might be because people would say, well, everybody can't afford it equally. So maybe this, rather than trying to change everything, we just talk about the inequity in paying for what we think of as a public good. For people that can't afford it, it is a burden. So how do we create a process where, I mean, there's a, like you were saying, that kind of scaled approach where for someone that's retired and doesn't have the, I mean, there's going to be a challenge to pay for $2,000 of sidewalk. The public picks the tab. But for someone who's, you know, living in, was it Falls Creek or whatever, I mean, they probably don't need help. They just need to be told.
Well,
You know?
Charlie, let
So
me,
it's current process, just with this supplemental funding, and then being arrested about the codes enforcement, taking away the public concern that maybe it's not fair. You know?
in a different forum, a few months ago, I brought up the term proactive. And the sense that I used the term at that time was not so much in enforcement, but so much as in assessing the needs. Because right now, what happens is we get a mom who lives near 27th Street, and she sees something bad, and she gets fired up, and she gets, the professional city staff charged up. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it would be to have a city ordinance that involves the school board and the schools, and say, okay, every period of time, you have to do a sidewalk safety audit or a walking and bicycling safety audit for your students. And that audit would be done, and at the end of that, we'd say, oh, here's the sidewalk in front of this property needs to be fixed. Okay, well, if we found out because it came through the audit, we could just say, if the city identifies it in the audit, the city's gonna pay for it. It doesn't matter whether it's in front of Bill Self's house or in front of some Social Security pensioner's house. The city's gonna pay for it because the city used a proactive method to go and audit these 51 miles of priority routes, safe routes. That's what I meant by proactive, is that instead of being complaint driven where the mom living near 27th Street starts barking, God bless her for doing that. I'm not criticizing that person. I think she's a good citizen for doing it. But what I'm saying is the whole model is wrong. The model ought to be, if these are our priorities, then we ought to be out periodically going out and looking at those as the work plan for the city staff and for the school district and for the private school for their property. That's what I meant by proactive. If something comes out of that audit,
Got it.
then the city pays for it.
So, on that approach,
The way these are written, number 2 and number 3 are different approaches, is that right?
No.
No,
No?
they would go hand in hand.
No, but
The way I wrote it was that if we go to a cost-sharing model, the way to make that work would be to be more proactive in getting homeowners to participate.
Then in number 3, that they talk about dividing the cities into districts. And they start with the neighborhoods that have the highest percentage of non-compliant sidewalks. To me, it seems like there are 2 different approaches.
and I think that was talking about how Ann Arbor did it. So maybe if we start back, so your first priority is to prioritize safe routes to schools. So then kind of what you were saying here, there's kind of 2 issues. One is cost sharing, who pays for it, and the second is how aggressive are you to get that compliance done? And so I'm going to actually, for right now, just take the cost sharing out, because I think you're right, Mary Ann, you probably need both to make that work, but let's talk about those 2 things separate, if you don't mind. We'll talk about those 2 issues separate. And so the first, so if safe routes to schools are the priorities, do you want some sort of proactive approach to go out and make sure that the sidewalks along those safe routes are in good condition and are actually safe routes to school? So do you want to have a program to do that? That's the question first.
So Mike mentioned the word audit, and I had written down, I was waiting for when we're going to talk about stuff that's missing, but I had written down inspection. There's some of the literature on sidewalk maintenance stuff. It talks about inspection programs and their routine, and we did have a conditions update 2014, so that data is pretty fresh. But before that, it was 2006, and my take on it was the 2014 audit wouldn't have happened without some pressure from the Pedestrian Coalition. So it probably would be important to start making that a routine procedure. And I don't know how frequent you audit, but it ought to become just standard practice. And then that gets to how much is that going to cost? Because what does it cost to do the full system audit? Right? I mean, it was,
I can't remember what it costs, but it could be something where we do it streets we do every 4 years. So, I mean, that could be one of the things that we do going forward every 4 years. And so we did, I guess it was 8 years between audits.
I mean, is that something that's not a whole lot of cost? I mean, you guys,
I guess one of the things that I would like to ask is, as a citizen committee, are we being asked to tell what the management activities are going to be, or are we being asked to express what citizens want the outcomes to be? Because it seems like we can get pretty caught up in, well, the city should do these inspections this often, whatever, but to me, those are management issues, and I don't think we're really qualified to address them. I think as I understand what we've been asked to do, it's been to say, if we only have a certain amount of funding, what are the priorities? And this whole cost sharing thing was a way to maybe to try to get more done more quickly. And I'm not particularly attached to it. If we want to throw out the cost sharing, that's fine. But I would like us to focus on sort of basic high-level recommendations and try to stay out of the exact details of how they'd be administered.
so I don't disagree with you at all, but I think it's a policy question, not a management question, about whether there ought to be audits of sidewalks on a routine basis. I don't know how often they're done. Yeah, that is probably, you guys have judgment, your profession should tell you how often that sidewalks deteriorate and should be inspected. I mean, the report I read was pretty clear, you make it systematic. So what I'm saying is we ought to at least call for that being routine and not something that has to come from a grassroots group trying to push for that data being relevant. Because it's 8 years old, I mean, that was becoming less relevant. So it's more about just not how it gets done, just that it ought to be routine practice that we do audits.
The recommendation could be, though, instead of that, could be that a report be provided to the city commission on some sort of an interval, which leads to, performance measurements, which you have to have some method to collect that data, and a lot of that data is being collected. But, if you have a proactive approach to compliance and you're doing cost share, it still leaves out the piece, did you make any progress, or do we know whether those things happened or not? So if there's some sort of a regular reporting mechanism to show progress towards these goals, or setting the performance measurements, whether we do it or someone else does it, but just that be, regularly reported.
So it could be adopt a proactive approach to sidewalk maintenance, and rather than just focusing on the details of it, just so that your system continues to be improved. So something like that.
Yeah, and then
So that kind of gets at the.
Just add in the word inspection, because that's, to me, it's about routine inspection and maintenance. If you're not out there inspecting it, then, I don't know.
Is that
I guess it seems
is that a bold face part, or is that in
In the text.
little?
Yeah, so like routine inspection and maintenance of the system is needed
Well,
to
certainly
show
the priority-
progress.
Certainly the priority portions of the system.
Yeah. I guess that's another question. Are we doing?
If you're,
Because the citywide, that whole audit you guys did was the whole entire system.
yeah, if you,
And the reason that was done, that was really the first step to this task force, because with all of the complaints we've gotten, the city commission complaints, city commission at least, wanted to get an overall understanding of
They needed a
to get to
baseline.
this point, to get, you know, the focus on getting funds to make those improvements. So we just went out, had temporary staff do it. It wasn't a huge cost, but walked every sidewalk for 3 months. 4 people did it. Came up with raw data just to get general understanding of the need. So, but having that in here without having a ways to make improvements, it doesn't, I mean, if we don't get to the part of making improvements,
Right.
then inspecting it every 4 years or 8 years doesn't really mean much. So, I mean, that's a smaller detail that in the future, the advisory committee can say, hey, we've done this much, it's time to do another audit to see what the priorities are. So I think it could be important to leave that as a sentence in here, going into the future, but that's kind of a specific thing that we
Okay,
should.
so we added that to the smaller text. Routine inspection and maintenance of the priority portions of the system is needed to show progress from the baseline inventory. How's that sound?
You had mentioned, Sheila, changing that to a proactive approach to sidewalk maintenance.
Yeah, but that sounds good.
I don't know, I'm just interested if that sets better with people or worse.
You know, the property owner compliance certainly
Sounds a
is
little.
clearer, what we're saying. I mean, so it depends on what your goal is.
I like this better.
I mean,
I
it's,
think the whole compliance thing is a very negative
mhm.
issue. Yes,
I mean,
and
that's what.
it doesn't work. It hasn't worked in our neighborhood. People really get up in arms.
Why do they get up in arms? Is it the cost?
Sometimes it's just change.
And I think there's the issue of unevenness, and say, you know, it's like when some people get pulled over a speeding ticket, you know, well, officer, why are you doing traffic? You know, there's people doing drugs and committing rapes and murders, why aren't you catching them? You know, so I think a lot of people see a 2-inch gap on a sidewalk is not a capital offense, and they go, why is the pressure of the government coming down on me for that?
We've got to figure out, if we really want sidewalks to make progress, we've got to figure out what's going to make that happen. And if instead of saying to somebody, oh, it was going to be $1,500 for you, but now it's going to be $750, that person is probably going to say, I'm still not doing it. And then we're back at square one where we haven't made any progress.
So let's go to that one, which would be this next recommendation, which is the cost-sharing model. So I guess maybe, does anyone here think that the property owner should pay for it themselves in all circumstances? If you do, raise your hand. Okay, so we've agreed on we need a cost-sharing model. Okay, so the way that we have this now, it just says move to a cost-sharing model for maintaining sidewalks. The model would make repairs for more affordable, low and moderate income property owners, and could also allow them to pay for repairs in installments. I think you guys talked through that a little bit about how that would work. Property owners would continue to be responsible for snow removal. And so then the next step, if you agree with that, the next step is how does the city come up with their portion, right? So do we agree with this statement here that there should be some sort of cost-sharing model for low to moderate income folks? And
Well, I think we need to, before we even get to that question, I think the question is, where is there 100% cost share? And I argued a few minutes ago, and I'll put it on the table again, that if you're on one of the priority routes and there's a problem, the city pays for it, 100%. So
Okay.
that cost sharing
That's
model.
kind of a detail though, Mike. What we're trying to get at is the top
we
line
agree?
things
Yeah.
here. And I think if we keep talking about the detail, we're not going to get through all of these.
Mike's bringing up, I mean, it is interesting how you get a shared use path and snow removal is off your plate. So there are certain places where it pays to be located there to avoid some of that burden. So to say that if your house is on a safe route,
Yeah, I mean,
Makes it
if we
sort of-
say we're starting there, I think people can say, all right, they're going to get to everybody eventually.
Right.
I think if we say we're only going to subsidize safe routes, then that's just very arbitrary from the homeowner's perspective.
Well, you have to draw a boundary somewhere. I don't think it's an arbitrary boundary. I think it's a boundary based on some logic. Arbitrary boundaries are just, pick a random number and that's it.
Right, but I'm just saying, you happen to live on 9th Street, and so suddenly you're getting a deal, and I happen to live on Oxford and I'm not.
But you're aware kids are being directed to travel to school.
Yeah, I think
So
if somebody said, there's 100 kids that walk on the sidewalk in front of my house every morning walking to X school, and this other person says, no kids ever walk to school on my street, I think that's pretty straightforward.
Did you have something?
I was just curious if we all thought that, well, so that was the Ann Arbor model, which was all funded by taxes. Are we assuming that we can't do that, and that's why we're considering cost sharing?
I put forward as a proposal that I thought going from one to the other would be extremely difficult. But that was just a proposal of mine. I don't think we had any agreement on that.
So is it possible, so Ann Arbor put it to a vote. If we made a recommendation that they be put to the vote,
They were also under an ADA compliance order.
which they would have had to fund whether they had a vote or not. I mean, I think they put to vote the idea of, are we sick and tired of this codes enforcement approach? And the answer was, yeah, let's pay for it this way. It's only $13 a year. So to me, this does seem like a fallback. I'd like to see it go for a vote. And it's not on the commission, it's on us. Can people in this community buy into the idea that they should share the cost of a public good?
Understanding that the alternative is they have to pay for it when it's in front of their house.
When somebody
With maybe a cost sharing
So
model.
now you know what I've done. And
I just cannot get past that cost sharing if we're really talking about public good. It's contradictory.
that's,
So when we were looking at we looked at other cities, I looked at 5, and there were 3 that I remember somewhat. And one of them, all of them seem to have, of those 3, seem to have some sort of cost share model rather than city paid for it all. But it was like, I remember one of them was 50/50 up to 500, I believe, or it was up to $450. So the most the property owner would pay was $450. But where there was ADA compliance ramps or whatever, the city paid all of it. And so, it was like,
So there was some kind of triggering logic that said the city's 100%. These other ones, we have a different model for these other situations. I'm trying to summarize what you
Yes.
just said, Aaron. I'm not trying to argue with you.
Yeah, no. But now that you mention it, yeah, that's what they were saying. It wasn't actually how I was thinking about it, but now that you mention it, I believe that's what they were saying. And, then they had something a little different. I remember Madison, I think it was also 50/50. The property owner paid for, it was more than $450, but I don't remember what it was. And so they all had some sort of cost share for sidewalks, which, I agree, but, for the public good, but it's like, I suspect there aren't that many communities out there where it's completely paid for by the city. Just thought.
But it's not
Yeah.
paid, but then
It's paid for by the
everybody's
people.
taxes
Yeah,
go up
it's paid for by the
substantially.
taxes.
And if
Yeah.
you're willing
Yeah.
to allow for that everybody's taxes will go up substantially, and if you think the commission can approve that and sell it to the community, or the community will buy in, my thing, and I agree with you, if you say it's a public good, it seems weird to ask for a cost share. I'm trying to look at what I consider political realities, and the city likes to move in incremental steps. And so, That's what I was trying to head toward. I think if everybody wants to say, no, we think the city should fund all of it, then let's run the numbers and see what kind of tax increase we're going to need to improve our sidewalks that way, and then let's ask ourselves if we think that's reasonable and feasible and passable.
I think we discussed this in a previous meeting, and I think, David, I think you were the speaker, if my memory serves correctly. You said that in certain situations, when a sidewalk problem was identified, the city would pay for it. You talked about where sewer heads or something, sewer cover boxes, I can't think of the correct term.
Manholes and
Yeah.
storm sewer inlets,
Yeah, and when those were next to the problem, the city paid for those. Okay, so there's a certain number of cases where Lawrence has already got the existing policy that if you check these blocks, Lawrence pays. Okay, now, so I think what we're talking about is, there might be 2 or 3 ways to do that. Right now, maybe we're going to expand it to 6 or 7 ways to do that. And then the second issue is, okay, when it's not one of those situations, what do we do with the rest of them? Do we go to a deductible, everybody has to pay the first 100, and then we look at your income tax return, and if you're Bill Self, you pay 100%, and if you're Mike Kelly, you pay 98%, and if you're the pensioner, you pay 2%. I don't know, whatever the answer is.
So maybe what we can do is agree that we want the city to kick in some money on maintaining sidewalks at this point. And what we need to know is how much would that be? So the question would be, are you saying that you want cost sharing just for the 51 miles and the priority routes? Or is it citywide?
I don't think we'd agree to what cost sharing, and I support what you were saying, to look into what that would cost if we were splitting this, if we were paying for it via sales tax or something.
No, I guess what I'm
We
saying
haven't
is,
made a decision on cost sharing.
I guess what I'm saying is, I think you've agreed that you want the city to put in some money into it, is kind of what you're saying, right? So I think everybody's.
Well, what I.
Overall, right, yeah.
And Bonnie, I mean, again, what we could have staff do is run a couple scenarios, and then we can look at those numbers. Because I believe what's going to happen is if we say it's 100% on the city, your property taxes are going to go up substantially, and you're going to be paying more sales tax. And so
It seems more equitable than how it is now. That's
Okay.
what I have a problem with. Some people pay for it, some don't.
And so let's run those numbers, but let me ask you a couple questions first. So would you just want to have city funding into the 51 miles or for all the sidewalks and the pedestrian plan?
Certainly, we want the answer for the 51 miles. I don't know how much further we want to go than that. We should have some case beyond that.
So we know that's $6.3 million, is that right?
I think we're just creating a line item.
Right. So, and then the next question a staff person would want to know would be, what's the time frame you want to make that happen in? Is that a 20-year program? Is that a 5-year program? If you want the city to pay 100% of it, what's the reasonable time frame that you want? And we'll run some different scenarios for your next meeting so you can see how does that impact sales tax and property tax, right?
Right.
What are the
So what's the
terms
reasonable
of the
time?
city commissioners? Were they 4?
Yeah.
I'd say a 4-year plan. No, just put it on the term.
They're every 2 years. There's
There's a stagger, but once you're voted in. like-
It's 3.
No, it's
not
3.
the same for everybody.
3 or 2. Some have 3, some have 2.
3 new every 2 years, 3 new commissioners.
But I don't agree with you that we tie it to politicians' terms. I think
I'm just trying to find a way to pick a number.
Right now, when you have a sales tax, do you have it renewed every 10 years, or does it have a sunset, or how do you do it?
We had one sales tax approved 2008, started in 2009 for 10 years, and that's expiring. That's been the first one for infrastructure, and so that will be a discussion, and for 2 years from now, whether or not to renew that. So that's coming up. I mean, that's one of the that's one of the best opportunities to get funds is through that renewal.
And then one of the questions will be, are we going to go for another 10 years? Are we going to go for 5 years? Are we going to go for 20 years?
Yeah, that's something that,
Yeah, I mean,
that group will work out, but I think this does need to be a long-term 20-year, more than 20 is probably too long, and less than 10 is not feasible, because if you say 4 or 5 years and we have $6 million, that's $1 million a year on sidewalks, and I can tell you that's going to be very difficult. That's just sidewalks, they include bicycle facilities. So getting 200, 300, 400, 500,000 a year in that range would be ideal, I think. Would be a good thing. So if you got $500,000 and then 20 years, that's $10 million bucks. That would get you all the safe routes to school, 51 miles. It would give you a sidewalk on every side of arterials and collectors, because that's around 2 to 3 million. So that something like that, we could run the numbers for that for 20 years in different scenarios, and we can also probably run a number that does a cost sharing model of 50%. And it could be one of the final recommendations that we have two different options. So the report could have 2 different options. This is the task force preferred option, and if that's not feasible for the commission or the public, here's another option. So we're going to look at a lot of options. There's not one. There could be more answers, and so we could have a preferred option and then a backup option. And I think a lot of that will come through with public comment when we put this out and they review the document and see those ideas. And so, but we can certainly work on putting together what that would look like for maybe an annual cost over certain time periods, 10 years, 15 years, or 20 years. Does that sound what you guys are looking for?
The one rejoinder I have to that is, if you've got a kid starting elementary school next year, they're going to be in elementary school for 6 years. And if you've got a problem with the route to school, you'd like to see it solved within 6 years.
Yeah, we got $6
We
million.
can't look at individuals. We have to
Yeah.
look.
We got $6 million for safe routes, and that's a lot. And that's just on the safe route. So if we, add the other second and third priorities, you're getting into a lot more than that. So it's going to take time.
Sure.
And so I think.
Or new taxes or money of some kind,
Yeah.
which is hard to come up with.
So I think maybe we could come up with some different scenarios for 10, 15, 20 years, 100% city funded, what this would cost, get safe routes to school.
And you said it would be also arterial and
And then I can add the arterial and collectors on one side of the street, because I think that's at a minimum the next priority is what it sounds like, to get, those are the destinations to get from neighborhoods to, not to get into specifics, but arterials and collectors are major thoroughfares, transportation related, that we could having a sidewalk on one side, that's the starting point, both sides, and you get into over $10 million. So I think sticking to feasibility, one side of arterials, one side of collectors, and run the numbers with adding that to the safe routes, and then just safe route, and then
6 million,
table.
price tag though, for the safe routes, that was 2 sides of the street.
That was, yes, both sides. Right?
Could we fund like the safe routes to school and then, just neighborhood residential areas via, property tax, and then pay for like collector and arterial with like the sales tax, because sales tax kind of directly relates to traffic on arterial and collector, because that's where businesses are located. So that's paying for the businesses. And then people who live in neighborhoods are trying to make their neighborhoods better. And thinking through the shared, just thinking of like the storytelling of it and how you would get it voted for. And, if we go to the public and say, okay, you're gonna start paying $7 a year for your sidewalk, but if you're the one who has to repair your sidewalk, it's gonna be half the price, so, you know, you're gonna save this much money. So, I don't think it's so bad that you might have to pay for part of it, is what I'm saying. Is that there can be storytelling to make that seem positive.
So at the next meeting, you could bring back these kind of two options. One, and I've highlighted them in yellow because you haven't really agreed to them, but you want to explore them further. Kind of implementing the cost sharing model and then funding the safe routes to school and arterials. And maybe you could come up with some different scenarios that you could look at. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
One other thing I would say or question on the cost sharing model. So you've talked about cost sharing, but do you just want to focus on the safe routes to schools? Or do you want to make that, if that's what direction you go, would you want to make that open to wherever sidewalks needed to be repaired?
And this is where I think we have to look at numbers because we all want everything.
Right, yes, you have to figure out how you can.
And until we start talking about numbers, I don't know how much sense it makes to talk about, we wish we had this and we wish we
Sure.
had that.
Okay, so let's talk about numbers. That's number 5, the next one, right? So there's been discussion, and this is quite a bit of text, and I've changed your order around a little bit, but I think it is still number 5. Establish sidewalk maintenance as a permanent line item in the CIP funded through property and infrastructure sales taxes. And so, assuming additional costs of $200,000 per year to manage this program, the total required for the first 5 years of the program would be $7.3 million.
And that was using the assumptions above.
Right, okay. So starting in old neighborhoods where low and modest income residents live, we might assume that property owners will pay an average of 40%. So you've kind of started doing some of these calculations here. I've heard people say that maybe it's a combination of property tax and sales tax. Tonight, do you want to work through and I think we've already kind of talked about the philosophy behind the two of those. Do you want to see what the impact of those would be on property taxes and on sales tax for the next meeting? Does that make sense?
Yeah, let's save that part for the next meeting.
Yeah, because that would come back with your dollars, right?
Yeah.
I think this is a pretty good start here to talk about how much you're talking about, but you're talking about a pretty significant amount for sidewalk maintenance and pedestrian-friendly community.
And I think one of the questions we maybe need to ask is the cost sharing going to be just in low to moderate income areas, or is it going to be in the whole city? I think in some communities that's been, if you're in the low to moderate income area, which it could be the CDB, what we call the CDBG area in Lawrence, where we do get federal funds to put in sidewalks in that area. So is that something that the task force has input on, as far as, you know, if we're running these models with the safe routes to school, some of the safe routes are in low to moderate income, some are not. Do we want to, does the cost share apply just to those areas, or should that apply across the board to everyone? I think that's a question that we should look
One
at.
way other cities do outside of the CDBG, just to kind of give you a little bit of idea, I don't know if you have a utility assistance program here, like if someone can't afford to pay their utility bill and they're a property owner, that oftentimes there's already criteria established so that you could, qualify. And so you don't have to have a program where you go through and qualify people.
Yeah, I don't think we have
You don't have-
that
okay.
utility assistance. Did we do that?
Yeah,
one?
according to Brian Kidney, he's already
Okay.
administering like $5 or $6 million worth of essentially grant programs.
I think that's through
Low
the
and-
Okay.
home funds.
So if you wanted to spread it throughout the community, you could use that as it wouldn't be a much higher burden for your administrative costs. There would be a higher burden, but you already have a program where you have people pre-qualify for that. Or an easier way to do it would be just if you're in the CDBG area.
How do people get on the list to exempt themselves from snow removal? Then they say, I'm physically disabled, I'm a property owner, I can't do my snow removal. And then there's a volunteer, call for volunteers. And so how do people get their address on that list?
Is that relevant to one of these top line?
No, well, the relevance is the same thing we just talked about. Is there an entering argument that we already administered that we can just use?
You just call.
Okay, so it's just.
I think there's more of a, where you have to bring in your taxes and qualify system
Okay.
set up. Yeah,
Yeah, to get the federal funds, you have to do that.
But
right.
the program you're talking about, the utility assistance program, is a federal, that's a federal program, so
Right.
those are federal guidelines.
Right.
We do have a little bit of, a very small program with our water utility, but it's not, it's more age-based.
Right, so there's some existing programs that you could,
Kind of, it's not a robust program.
So
Okay.
to get back to your question, Dave, I think if you can run some numbers for us, it'll help us decide, are we really looking community-wide, or are we going to limit this to, because I think what's going to happen is the numbers are going to look so big, if it's everybody, that we're going to start thinking about how can we pare this down to make this a reasonable recommendation. But I don't know if we can tell you the answer to what you're saying until we kind of go through some models.
okay.
And as far as the cost sharing, 40, on here we had an average of 40%.
Yeah, that, I just pulled that out of the air.
Is that
That's not,
something,
that's my thing.
Is it, should we, when we run some of the numbers, should we look at different percentages? Does anyone have any thoughts on
I'd say look like at 10, 30, and 50.
percent?
Have a range, yeah, rather than just a single number there. I don't think the math is going to be that much harder to do it 3 times at a different number.
Okay.
We can do that.
Okay, and then 6, pursue walk-friendly community designation. Any comments on that? You like that one?
Yeah, and that one, I'm gonna probably reach out to some of you to get some text in there that would justify why that's important and how it would be used.
I was just saying, it would need some elaboration.
Sure,
She
okay.
just-
Right.
Great. Okay, let's go to the bicycling environment. Yes,
I eliminated number 1 in my notes. And my number 6, or number 7, is establish safe crossings at intersections and mid-blocks as needed. And I
I'm
paralleled-
sorry, are you still on
Pedestrian.
pedestrian? Okay,
And I was comparing that to number 6 on the bicycle.
okay, yeah, you mentioned that earlier.
Okay, just repeat that, establish safe crossings.
At intersections and mid-blocks as needed, bulb outs, longer cross times at lights, that sort of thing.
Would you email that?
Sure.
Would you
Say
email
it
to
again,
me?
I'm sorry, real quick. Mid-block, safe,
Establish safe crossings at intersections and mid-blocks as needed, bulb outs, longer cross times at lights. That's as far as I got.
okay. And so David, now that, how would that be implemented? If, let's say that became a recommendation, would there be costs associated with that, and how would that be implemented?
I mean, it would be, the cost would be in the same loop as the safe routes. Yeah, on the safe route, we could.
I guess the one question I have is, do you not think that we ought to do that? Because if there's an intersection or mid-block crossing that somebody thinks they need to have, and we run it through the traffic safety and, if it's approved, now, funding's always the issue, something needs to be done. But that's the question, do you think we not do that?
But we have
I
some.
would give you a flat out
We,
no.
we have some identified intersections and crosswalks, which through the safe route maps and discussions that we can include, I mean, that are in that safe routes, 51 miles, that can be part of that.
I guess that's what I was kind of trying to get at. It's maybe
maybe it's
establish is not the right word, but maybe fund improvements to.
And that sentence could probably just be included up in the safe routes, in the whatever number that was.
Okay, I'm looking at number
including-
4 under cycling.
Under the bike, what we were trying to
Okay, what-
capture was that there are certain crossings that are trying to create this crosstown bikeway, that at certain points it's kind of challenging. So what is the way to make that crossing safer? And we didn't really have an answer yet. It was just kind of like, what are those key crossings that people might see as the scary ones?
Well, and the same is true at like 27th and Iowa when they put in the 2 left turn lanes. It's very hazardous for pedestrians. We need to do something. When we redesign the intersection, we need to do something better.
And I want to say that a lot of these, I always feel like need to be bicycle and pedestrian, because often, and depending on, I mean, if we're talking about an 8-year-old child to your 80-year-old grandmother, it doesn't matter whether they're on foot or on a bike if you have safer intersections, or intersections that are safer for bicyclists and pedestrians. I mean, maybe we should just
There are certain things
replicate that, but yeah, or,
like a bike box is not something a pedestrian would get into.
Oh,
And a bike box,
I don't know what that is.
it's basically, bikes are given a space in front of the line essentially, where they're able
Pedestrian
to,
crossing, but for bicycles.
where, pedestrians will queue up at the intersection waiting for the crossing signal. It's basically the same thing for bicyclists. And then some places they'll have a bike light so that the bikes are given the chance to get out there. So it's just, there are different applications that are really unique to bicyclists.
I guess
And-
I'm trying to get back at what you're trying to get at, to make sure the recommendation says, not necessarily the same thing, but that if that was given to David, he would know what to do with it, like if the commission. So do you need to go back and fund, do you not have enough money to go and make improvements to those? Is it a design standard change? Is it identification of those intersections that are unsafe? I'm just trying to figure out what would be the recommendation.
I think this goes back to some of the stuff that we recommended, which, for instance, when you go and change road, like 15th and Iowa, and you add double turn lanes in every direction, it is clearly less safe for pedestrians. So I think our recommendations originally, that was what we were trying to say is, even if you're, I saw this somewhere that it was phrased very well, the Federal Highway Administration website that I was just looking at yesterday, discussed you can't take out a route or make a route less safe unless you have an alternative route that is safer, a legitimate alternative route. So this example, and I'm sorry, this is about the 4th or 5th time I brought it up, but the example I give was the city engineer at that time, which is not Dave, just to clarify. When I brought this up to him, I said, hey, you're making this road wider in every direction, and there are a lot of students crossing there to go to KU. What are you going to do to mitigate for those students? Because the thought was, oh, well, we can't afford it. But I'm like, yeah, you're laying down more concrete, you're putting more concrete in for cars that seem to be basically mostly for game nights. And so every single day you have students crossing there, yet it's less safe. And he told me, well, they can, they'll have to take their life in their hands, or they'll have to go to Harvard and Iowa, which is not safer. Yeah.
So I guess I'm
There
trying
wasn't
to,
a
so I
separate. So-
understand what you're saying. I'm just trying to figure out and I know what you want the end result to be, but what's the recommendation?
Yeah.
So it sounds like the recommendation is not more funding, because that might be too far, but the recommendation might be when there's a street project that's underway that, you know, we set some kind of policy that it can't be worse for any of the users,
Well,
yeah.
that's the complete streets policy.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have
First do
that,
no harm.
and we follow it, and every project's different, 15th in Iowa is different. I mean, we always try to make those improvements. I'm not saying we did anything wrong at 15th in Iowa, I don't quite get away back from specifics, but going back to moving on, for intersections, are we talking about on the pedestrian routes or on bike routes or both? Are we, I don't know if we, are
I
we
think
moving on
you're
to,
saying everywhere, anytime there's an intersection that's unsafe, is that kind of what you were saying?
so can we come back to the intersections and go on to the bike?
Well, that's what she's basically saying.
Yeah, and it's been recorded on here, and I
Right.
think we can work on it some more.
So, yeah, I think basically what I'm trying to get at is you'd like to, I'm trying to figure out if you're trying to retrofit or moving forward, make them safer or both. It sounds like there's retrofit that needs to be done.
There will be, take 6th Street, for example. There's a high accident rate, crash rate, on 6th Street. So we've already addressed somewhere in our stuff that we needed to address safety. Part of the problem with 6th Street is the blocks are too long, there aren't many places to cross, so there's a lot of jaywalking. And that's where your mid-block crossings, intersections. And it's gonna have to happen gradually. It's not something you say, we're gonna do this project, we're gonna get it done in 5 years. That's not gonna happen.
Okay, all right, well, we'll capture that and then we'll move on to the bicycle. That sounds good. Y'all can wordsmith that and try to get that to work better. Okay, so the number one item on bicycling environment, create a network that is welcoming and comfortable for people of all ages and abilities.
Stole that directly from your San Francisco example. The welcoming and comfortable language I thought was well thought out.
Number 2, complete the Lawrence Loop. Number 3, complete 2 crosstown bikeways. Number 4, establish safe crossings at key intersections. Number 5, create a bike-friendly downtown. And number 6, pursue gold platinum status as League of American Bicyclists Bike-Friendly City. That was it. So do you want to pick gold or platinum on bicycle-friendly city? Gold? Everybody agree to gold?
For now.
For now?
Yeah, we haven't really studied what's in these, so
Okay.
I think we're gonna have to do some more work, but let's just leave it in there.
Okay, I'll just highlight that right now. So let's go back up to the top then. Are there any of these on here that cause any major concern on the big statements? Yes.
I think number 1 is similar to number 1 with the walking, and that it's more of the,
I totally agree. This is more about the framing of the entire set of recommendations around the loop and the crosstown bikeways. Shouldn't just be bike lanes. They need to be of the type that really are welcoming and comfortable. So we went to the bikeways plan, looked at the list of different bike facility types, and said, which of these do we think is going to feel welcoming and comfortable to people of all ages? And thought the key ones were the neighborhood greenways, the cycle tracks, the buffer bike lanes, and the shared use path. Out of that list, there's maybe like 8 or different, maybe 9 different facility types. One thing that I thought after we finished that day, the other day, was I think Manhattan or Topeka has a definition of, some similar definition, and they're defining a neighborhood greenway, and they have it basically 20 miles an hour is the kind of target speed, which is what makes it comfortable and welcoming for people of all ages. So we didn't put that in here, but it kind of gets to a comment you made, Carol, about the speed. And I know we talked about can't just legislate that speed, you got to design it that way. So it could maybe help people to understand that the goal is to try to establish the design standard that's going to allow it to not invite fast traffic. And that's not explicit in what we drafted already, so probably, it also needs to include some statement about traffic calming, kind of that engineering component to slow the traffic.
Well, and that's what a bicycle boulevard is, so.
Yeah, is there a definition of a bike
Yeah,
boulevard?
that's a bike boulevard that includes traffic calming that is built and constructed to maintain speeds at 20 miles an hour to lower them, discourage high-speed cut-through traffic, so that kind of goes with the bike boulevard.
Do you think it's important to define that, or? just leave it?
I don't think so. I don't
Okay.
think it is.
When I read it, it looked to me like we were trying to restrict ourselves to those 4
Yes.
strategies.
For
Is that right?
the sake of the loop and the crosstown bikeways, we're basically saying this is the focus. There's a whole lot of other stuff in the bike plan, but we were trying to go from what the initial group had recommended around the loop, and there was discussion about how to get across. And so those first, the loop and the crosstown bikeways were the bulk of our conversation. And then we got into the wheelchair user piece, I think, was Marilyn forwarded some comments from Dot, and I know Dot in other conversations has talked about the need to ensure that the loop, the slopes of the loop are appropriate for people in wheelchairs. If it's too steep, that can be a problem. So it's not quite doesn't quite make sense to call the people, it's more like the multi-use network. So.
So when you say the network, does that mean all of this?
Now we're talking about really just the network within the network, the loop.
The loop and spokes, okay.
Or the crosstown bike lane.
That's a little confusing because it sounds like you're saying bike lanes and sharrows are no longer okay.
Yeah, I get that. And I think we kind of knew that, but we didn't wordsmith this. We just wanted to capture Marilyn kind of directed us to capture as much as we could, and we didn't bother with making sure it's all perfect.
Keep in mind, this
It
all
was-
happened over Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Sunday, 3 to 6.
Yeah, really great.
I've just got a kind of a question or formatting question then. So if we take the first item and we create that more of it's a preamble, that's kind of what we're trying to do. Create that network that's welcoming and comfortable for people of all ages and abilities, from 8-year-old child to your 80-year-old grandmother. So that you've really said that kind of the priorities then are the loop and the spokes,
Yeah.
kind of, right? So is that
Maybe the word
like,
network is the wrong word, because that was kind of where we just said, let's move on.
Because it
But
seems
it's like we're trying to say within the whole system, there needs to be a certain,
Yeah, because it seems like if you said with the second one, kind of like what we did with on the sidewalks, the second one is the priority, the priorities are the
Yeah, what's
loop
the priority,
and
right.
the crosstown, and then under that, in the description, talking about what those facility types would look like within those priorities.
right, so I guess I was trying to, in a way, mirror it a little bit back to the pedestrian, like, so what's your priority? It's the loop and the spokes to be as the priority network. Is that kind of what you're saying?
yeah, but it's a network that's specifically designed for all ages and abilities.
Okay,
So that's.
so
Would
does
it make sense to combine 2 and 3 and say, we want this network within the network, and this is what it's composed of, at least initially?
That's kind of what I was thinking, is some way to say, and the priority network is this. It's your loop and this is kind of follows the preamble. Does that make sense, kind of? So,
Yeah, I think that's good, because really that first section is all about that priority network. And then we
Okay.
jump out of that network and talk about these other issues like key crossings.
Yeah, because there still are a
Catchy
lot of
bumper
them.
sticker name for 2 and 3 now.
No, actually, I think we've just collapsed those two into one. That's
Okay,
the priority network.
priority network.
And then we have the intersections. We have bike-friendly downtown,
Okay.
and then and I could imagine maybe 6 and 5 being collapsed if we talk about, bike-friendly status being focused on really developing a bike-friendly downtown. It becomes like undeniable. This is a bike-friendly town. So that's another. We didn't really get into the details of the bike-friendly piece. We were pulled up a analysis I had done quickly after that priorities thing. I didn't really talk about it, so I can see where we could kind of refine what does bike-friendly mean at the next level.
Yeah, I think on both, on the walking and biking side, we need to understand better what those designations create for the community. Is it a set of goals, or what is it, and what are those? Otherwise, I don't think the commissioners, or even I, even know exactly what that
Well,
means.
Right.
the bike-friendly one, I think, is pretty well defined because we've gotten feedback from, the application where we've been designated as a bronze about those next steps. So I think that's pretty easy, but the walk-friendly, since we've not ever applied for that, we'll have to kind of use experience of other communities to kind of look at those differences.
I read the walk-friendly link that you sent out. I don't know that we'll ever get there. We can't even get past it in our own discussions.
Well, I think that's where the recommendation is to pursue that designation.
Well, we need to learn more about it.
I think it's easy on the bike-friendly one because the report tells you here's what to do next. And it's kind of a, let's go out and get that done.
Let's keep going.
Could we call the loop and the crosstown bikeways the backbone of the network?
Well, let's not worry about what we call it right now. I can keep moving since it's 8:15.
so, yeah. So your first recommendation is to complete the priority network, and that's both the loop and the spoke, and whatever you're going to call it. Yes, ma'am.
I don't want to drag on, so I feel a little bad. I think the safe crossings at key intersections should be expanded to cover just connecting the system that we currently have, because what we have is really, it's growing fast. We have a lot of bike lanes, we have a lot of sharrows, we have a lot of things that are pretty well connected that are almost there. From what we heard from the community is that people don't bike because they don't feel safe on the streets. And I think that creating these connections, establishing through graphics the rules of the road that cars need to respect bikes, that's actually going to change the culture of our city to get more cyclists out there. I think the loop and spoke is really awesome because, it is an opportunity for young people and old people to get out and bike, but it's only one crossing and it's going to impact very few people, and it's not going to it's going to have less of an impact on someone choosing to bike to work, other than like, well, yeah, I'll take part of that, but then I have to get out on the road, and then I have to go down, I have to cross 6th Street, or I have to go across 9th Street, I don't know, wherever. We just have a great system, and I think that should be our first priority, is to spend the money to make that actually work to have a bigger impact.
Well, so, I don't know if you saw that. So we made a map, and it's basically
Did the map get around?
Yes, you did.
enhancing the system that is already there, saying, so the system is good,
Should have been 10 copies.
the system is good, but we want to enhance it so that we have these other facilities that I mean, I see what you're saying, but that, you know, an 8-year-old can ride on, because we really don't have facilities that is the case. And so it's really just follows, so the priority network just follows what is already there with trying to make sure those are the first things that are connected.
Yeah, I read an article recently that it was about like who cyclists are, and the stereotype is like, oh, hip young people are cyclists. It's all about the culture, but really a majority of cyclists now are low-income people of a minority who ride bikes. That's not children getting around town. That's people who have jobs that don't have the money and have to get far places. And you know, I think it's important that kids to be safe, but to have the greatest impact, you know, we have to think about the people that are already on the bikes, that are already in danger because they ride on streets that don't have, you know, connected systems.
Marianne, when I think about that concept, I think about putting the emphasis on riders who are riding for economic necessity as opposed to riders that are riding for fitness and recreation. And I think that's another perspective on that. I think I largely agree with you. But I'd say if we're doing it so that people can be more productive, I think that's a stronger reason than people having a better time. Not to say it's not a bad idea to have a good time, but you know,
Yeah,
people need to be
yeah.
productive.
You originally said you wanted to expand the safe crossings at intersections. How would you change that language to speak to what you just talked about?
Well, I think that on top of intersections, you know, completing the, you know, unfinished segments of the bike plan that can easily be done by just, you know, putting in a bike lane or, you know, on roads that it might be markings
So
instead
we
of.
talked briefly about that, because that's one of the lowest cost things in the bike plan
Yeah.
right now.
So like improve,
It's $250,000, Jessica? You're,
Budget to do,
the bike lanes that are called for in the bike plan, it's basically on the cost of the bike plan.
add a bike lane.
No, it's not, it's actually already in the bike plan. Do you know what the estimated cost is to install all the bike lanes?
Not on the top of
It's
my
like maybe 100,000, it's on there.
What do you mean to install it?
But
In the
Charlie,
bike
those
plan.
all assume that they can be done within existing right-of-way, and some of them assume that parking needs to be removed, which they've chosen not to do in some cases.
So we kind of
I
had that
mean, when I say
discussion
they,
and
the
then did the,
commission.
well, this may not be, we don't know if this is really as easy as writing a check for $250,000.
Yeah.
So, but I've always thought it does seem like the cheapest thing to do, get the bike lanes now.
I
don't know if
think I
that's-
see what, I think we can balance these two things. I think we can balance creating some protected facilities for a wider range of users with serving the cyclists who are already on the road. And, you know, I don't think it's going to be an either-or thing, and I appreciate you pointing that out. I just wanted to make a comment in terms of the bikeways. We might want to think about, instead of just, let's follow this line, how do we connect the destinations in the community that everybody recognizes are the key destinations? How do you get from downtown to KU campus? How do you get from the KU campus out to South Iowa Shop? You know, what are the places that attract the largest number of people? And then we sell it based on that. You're now going to be able to ride your bike from downtown to KU and off to, rather than, you know, necessarily focusing. I mean, I know it's important eventually to focus in on the exact route, but like the north-south route here, I don't see that as really, other than KUS campus, hitting any major destinations.
Well, but it connects to West Campus, and, I mean, we can add that in, but it connects to West Campus and then all the other routes that KU plans to put in whenever. And I think that was kind of the idea, that connects all these neighborhoods to a spot that easily connects it to KU, which means it opens up a lot more people that are able to get to KU on bike.
What we're not calling for is trying to reduce the speed on Bob Dylan's Parkway, but we could easily turn right there, I think right into campus. But the north-south piece,
We were just
you're-
focusing on making one good north-south route and one good
Yeah.
east-west through, all from the loop.
I support what Marilyn is saying, in that we don't really have the knowledge and authority to say this is what the path should be. Michael Allman had sent out that document, and one of the suggestions was to have, a study done of the traffic, and I think that could be, and I don't know how extensive a study needs to be, but I think, recommending looking at the plan and some group determining, other than just like finding a line,
It is the plan. It's a line along the plan that we suggested having like more protected routes. So this is the bikeway plan from the planning document.
Right.
That we just said it'd be nice to see these routes be safer, and we want it to be protected so that more people can use it, and we want it to be the priority route, so we actually have something that's connected. So across town, you have something that's connected. That doesn't mean that any of the rest of it goes away or that you don't have bike lanes. It means this route is a protected, connected route all the way through town that connects one side of the loop to the other if you're trying to get across town.
I think we just need to spend more time on deciding on that route. Because when I look at that, I see it going down 11th Street, and I'm like, I don't bike 11th Street, and I spend 8 hours a week biking.
Yeah, let me clarify. So we actually discussed immensely this route, the north-south route, but then we actually kind of got sidetracked and we were there for a really long time. So the route that is east-west, we actually didn't really finish. So I wanted to say that here. We didn't really finish, and we wanted to talk about more because we started talking about the intersections, and so we never really got to finish it, but we just kind of brought it in because we said, well, we want people to be able to discuss this more. So yeah, I agree.
Why don't we hold that then? Because I think what I added to that was that you need to think through that maybe a little bit more and have more discussion, and added the idea to connect people to places, and kind of how that would be kind of the key message that you would be including there. But I wanted to go back to something that was also, we talked about establishing safe crossings at intersections, but something that I think you also said about kind of improving safety on the road through sharrows and proper signage, and kind of, you were talking about inexpensive, just things that would be less expensive. Right.
Yeah, she said connecting the system that we already have, and I'm rephrasing, providing wayfinding to help people understand how to use it.
I think it's a little more than the wayfinding though. It's like the rule that you're supposed to pass 3 feet from the cyclist. That's not well known, and that could be done through signage. That Bill Anderson brought that up at the last VAC meeting.
And
even things like, I was riding out in Venture Park, and when you're about to cross 23rd Street, there's a nice sign that says, like, allow the cyclist to pull into your traffic lane. And then I kept going, and then I hit the traffic circle, and there wasn't that sign. And then I had to put my arm out, and I had to fight with cars coming at 20 miles an hour, because I was either going to hit the curb or I was, going to get myself into the traffic. And so just more information.
Consistent.
And it's maybe road markings and signage. And
Do we have any way to estimate that? Like, that's kind of, at the last VAC meeting, Bill Anderson was talking about this, and it kind of gets lost with, where exactly you're going to do it, what size of the sign, all that stuff. And if we're trying to get to the level of, here's the price, here's the cost, and that's a higher priority to pay for that than it is to pay for this. I mean, I'm kind of stuck there, I don't know. I mean, I agree conceptually, you want it all connected, but then that would be like to say, let's just fund the bike plan, get it done.
So could we put some cost to this for a future meeting, the loop?
Or at least dedicate a certain amount of money.
It's a little bit
for it?
challenging just because right now as it's highlighted, it depends what facility type it is.
Okay.
And there hasn't been a lot of work done in terms of, I don't know what, based on these upgraded facility types, what existing right-of-way looks like, what costs are gonna look like in some of those places. Some we might already have an estimate that might be reasonable, and some it might not.
Yeah, I think we can come up with some costs for the loop and some estimated costs to do a general east-west and north-south connection. ballpark costs with traffic calming or shared use path or what that may look like. I think we can
That'd be great.
meet with the bicycle subcommittee.
I guess you probably just want to make sure those are the routes before you cost them, though.
Well,
Yeah.
you're saying
Kind
kind
of
of general
alignment.
I think
part
there's
is across
some,
town.
there's
You could use a
some
general-
numbers that, I mean, when we do these estimates for
Length.
projects, we just ballpark things and say, you know, for a mile to do a bike boulevard, it's gonna be $100,000. We can do that and start, because we just ultimately just need to get ballpark numbers.
Right.
All of our pedestrian sidewalk estimates are ballpark numbers. And then at the end, we have all the bike stuff, the pedestrian stuff, and then we kind of allocate it from there. So, but I think we can do that in the next month before the next meeting with that group and look at maybe different routes or different facilities, and the loop is probably one of the more easy ones to come up with the number. And that's,
Is there anyone else that wants to join this committee without us hitting the coma?
We already have 4.
But we cannot have 6, we can have 5.
Okay, I was told
But
that
majority
5
plus
was,
one.
I was told that
Six.
5 was too many.
well, now we have 10.
10 members.
So majority is 6.
Who's on the
5 is not a
committee
majority.
now?
The city attorney needs to tell you the right answer.
Right.
She
Does
said it was
anyone want to
6.
be on the committee that's not on the committee? I don't know who is.
Well, I mean, I think Marion, you're the one that I feel like we're missing you.
You would just have to notice them. I mean, you can still
Yeah,
meet,
you
just
can
notice
still
it.
meet, you just have to make them in a public, you have to have them in a meeting that would be open to the public.
We can,
Yeah, that'd be great.
We can work on that.
Yeah, let's work on that.
And sales tax, is that kind of what you're thinking for bicycle dollars? I don't know, that wasn't addressed in this part of it.
Well, yeah, I think we're gonna have to come back to the funding and the feasibility of the property tax and sales tax and how much. But I think one of the questions we have could be, you know, if we have $1, how much, what percentage do we spend on bicycles? What percentage do we spend on pedestrian? Are they separate or are they not separate? I think that's a question, hope, maybe we can answer here tonight before we leave, is that, are they separate, are they not separate? And do we want to try to have a percentage to go to pedestrians, percentage to go to bikes? I mean, I know some facilities are shared facilities, but that's it.
I'd even suggest a little different approach is that you say, okay, whatever our pot of money is, we're gonna say, just gonna make up numbers right now. 20% of it is bike pure and 20% of it is bicycle pure. And then the rest of that, the remaining 60%, you manage that as projects come up. And, you know, some years you may use 50% of that remainder in bicycle. And some years you may use, you know, 40% in pedestrian. But you dedicate part of it for the specific means, and then you have some management latitude to allocate the remainder.
So if we
among
get,
the
if we
types.
get $1 million, are we to spend it on pedestrian facilities or bike facilities? That's always the question. I mean, that's what this.
Well, and that's
this
what I'm
whole
saying.
thing
And I'm
is.
saying if you got $1 million, the formulation I just said, you get 200,000 on bike, 200,000 on pedestrian minimum, and then, you know, you decide about the rest. Well, what project are we going to try and do this year? We're going to do something that needs some right-of-way. Okay, we're going to spend some money to get some right-of-way. That's gonna put it, you know, more money on that.
I think it might be easier for you to maybe give a little bit of that allocation once you know how big is that number and how many years it would take to you know, so it's all time and dollar relevant. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, to answer that question, I don't know how I would answer it unless I knew if I could complete the loop and the spoke plan in 20 years and I could complete the safe routes in 10. Do you see what I'm saying? Like that's how you would figure out maybe how to allocate it. Would that make sense to you
Well-
guys? Maybe that's just how I'm thinking about it.
And I'm going to maybe throw out something that'll be controversial, but
Oh, no, don't do that.
that is that, and I'm always thinking of politics and how we sell things. And the fact is that virtually every citizen of this community is a pedestrian or wheeler in some form, unless you're complete in a nursing home, okay? There's only a fraction of people who ever will bike, and I don't know what that fraction is, but it's a fraction. And I think we should consider that, and consider that pedestrian facilities potentially are going to benefit more people. And I think that the citizens would probably agree with that. We've been talking 50-50 because that makes it easy for us and we don't hurt each other's feelings by saying one is more important than the other. But if we put our community hat on, we really have to ask, is 50-50 really what's going to help this community the most?
Okay, just kind of being a devil's advocate on that and being a bicyclist, I would like to say that I think maybe having more people bicycle ultimately benefits the city more in reduced, more environmentally friendly, that sort of thing, fewer cars.
And I'll add,
I agree.
there are more kids that live within biking distance of a school than walking. And the most important part of Safe Routes to School, I'll put money on, is getting more kids to bike, not to walk. I mean, it takes a lot shorter time. I mean, you have a 2.5 mile distance for the bus. If my child has gotten to the point where she can walk in 32 minutes, 1.6 miles. That's a big burden on me to walk her to school in the morning, turn around and walk back. And, you know, she's on a bike, she doesn't have the capacity yet. She's only in first grade and we haven't got her off training wheels. But she'll be able to make that trip in no time. And the PE teachers right now are so excited about teaching bike education in the schools. I feel like that's one thing of Safe Routes being under the pedestrian side. What I hear out of that is people haven't comprehended the power of Safe Routes to get people to learn how to ride bikes safely in this community. And we're just sort of seeing it as a pedestrian thing. And give it 5 years and I bet you're going to see more kids biking. You know.
I had no trouble.
Safe Routes is all about sidewalks. We're not building bike lanes for kids to ride bikes to.
Yeah.
People who are going to go,
And the kids are on bikes, on sidewalks.
but they're on the sidewalks.
Yeah.
And
So
that's
this is the pedestrian
side of it.
side.
No, I get that. And I'm thinking, what I'm wanting to get out here is that the idea that Safe Routes is just helping pedestrians,
No, I'm
it's
not saying
really,
that.
these kids are going to learn how to be bikers in this community.
No, I understand that that's part of the health department's program and everything, but, you know, look at what doctors advise to all their patients. What do they say? Start walking.
Well, what I'm saying is
Walking.
it doesn't, to me, it's not either or.
And I'm not
When we look
saying,
at
but
these
at
North
some
South
point, we
connections-
need to decide, is it 50-50? Is it
That's a good
60-40? Is it
A lot of the
70-30?
facilities will benefit both.
Yeah, and that's,
And that's fine, but when they don't, you know, it's just like the family budget. I mean, if you have only so much money, how much are you gonna spend on this and how much are you gonna spend on that?
I think
So if
Marilyn's
you look at
point that the community will vote for pedestrian things and be less likely to vote for bike
Yeah,
things,
I get that.
I think that's huge, and I think that's true.
That's, I think,
I acknowledge that.
So I
Pardon?
think,
that's, I
Well,
think, the
I'd
point.
like
I
to
think-
support part of what Charlie was saying. When I think of kids going to school, they don't separate pedestrians and bicycles, and they do both in our neighborhood. However, I want to point something out from a truly pedestrian perspective. I grew up in an inner city, a very large inner city. We didn't have cars. We walked everywhere. When I could walk, I walked faster than anybody else in this town. They couldn't keep up with me because I was so accustomed to catching commuter trains. What I see in Lawrence is pedestrians are trying to catch up to where they've never been. Cyclists are looking forward. Pedestrians don't even have a past in Lawrence. So to me, the priority is to get enough facility for pedestrians so that we can at least walk around like we should be able to walk around.
So I think with that, it is a little bit after 8:30, and I guess probably the next steps would be, sounds like David and Jessica have some number crunching to do, and others sitting up there on the dais probably do too. Probably would be a good, I feel like you got through what your priorities are, so that is like a major accomplishment.
We skipped a couple.
You skipped a few, but you selected, really from the pedestrian perspective, what your priorities are, and what the bicycle perspective, what your priorities are. When you get a budget, those priorities may shrink, and that will help you at the next meeting, I think, or at a future meeting, to really think about, as a family, how would you spend that money, and how would voters be more likely to support whatever it is that you put forward. So I think with that, anything else,
Yeah,
Mary?
well, thank you, Sheila.
Yeah, thank you.
It's obviously, could go on, but that was, I think we made some good steps. The next item on the agenda was next steps, and what I would like to suggest is that the writing committee, while staff is working on some number scenarios, the writing committee try to take the draft that Sheila has written on today and work with it some more to update it, and also to correct some of the things that you told us about at the last meeting that we just simply didn't have time to do. I would like to have another draft ready by a mid-month, say December 15th. That would then go out and people would have an opportunity to review and maybe give some feedback in writing, and then maybe we can do some other draft improvements so that when we come together again on January 6th, if that's the date, there's actually been some work done in smaller groups. I think that's frankly essential, because to meet our timeline, which we've already got our 60-day extension, but to have this report ready by the end of February, essentially, we have to have a public comment period, and after the public comment period, we have to have time to do revisions based upon what the public has said. So if you throw this all into a timing sequence, we need to have a draft ready for public comment by January 15th. That's coming right up. So I'm hoping we can all do some work as we have time available over the holidays. I think in terms of assignments, the writing committee definitely has some work to do. This bicycling group, if we want to have you work further, you can. We also tonight didn't get to the citizen advisory recommendation at all, so I'm not exactly sure how we're going to process that. Probably a key thing here is for now, is there anything else that we want to request of staff?
Well, I just have a question. I know Charlie's team did a lot of work and called together a lot of people, which is a really good idea. I'm wondering if we can send that out for separate public comment, or do we have to send the whole thing out?
When you say that, what do you mean?
I mean the citizen advisory part, because to me, I think that's going to attract a lot of comment, because it stirs a lot of rice balls. Which it rightfully should.
We don't send that out yet. I think we need to probably talk about other things to look at before we.
Well, I'm not saying send it out tomorrow, but I'm just saying, can that be set out separately from the rest of the things we've been talking about, the funding and prioritization.
To me, that creates more problems than it solves.
That's fine.
Any other requests for staff? Some of this, frankly, I mean, I'm going to have to look at what we did and make some assignments. And some of you who may not think you have an assignment may get an assignment because it's clear that we still have quite a bit of work to do. But I think we can get there. This little ad hoc bike group made tremendous progress in just a short period of time, so I'm very encouraged by that. Let's talk about January and February meeting dates. Dave?
Yeah, I was gonna try to put this on the Elmo, but on Wednesday, January 6th, which we had, I think everyone can make it except for Pat on that date. Well, let me backtrack. There was 3 days in January, again, and they were Mondays and Wednesdays where the commission room was open. Not that we had to meet here, but it seems that's the easiest place to hold it. So on January 6th, everyone but Pat was able to make it. So I think that might be a good, the majority could make it that day. So to have one more January meeting, it's either the 18th, Monday the 18th, which is Martin Luther King Day, or Wednesday the 20th. On Monday the 18th, everyone can make it but Mary Ann. And then on Wednesday the 20th, Dee and Pat indicated they couldn't make it. So more folks could make it on Monday the 18th. It is MLK Day.
Is that a work day for you guys?
It is not, but that doesn't mean that we can't come in, and I'm happy to come in if that's the majority. If the majority of the folks can make it, I don't think that's a big deal, not to me. So I think, and I haven't, and to be honest, I haven't checked with everyone on staff's availability, but just want to focus on what can get the most people on task force here, and I'm open that day. So I think we need to figure out the 18th or 20th, and I don't know if other folks are influenced or not versus that holiday on the 18th, whether or not, I didn't mention that when I sent out the poll. So if it doesn't make any difference to anyone else and more people can make it, and since Pat can't make it Wednesday the 6th, then she can make it the 18th, but she couldn't make it the 20th. It seems like that's...
I'm able to change the 20th though, so, because I hate for people to have to do that. So I can maybe change the 20th, so.
Okay. So then there would be the same, I mean, it would be, we would still have the same amount the 20th. So if maybe that would be preferred to do the 20th. Because I know I think everyone will be here that 20th, maybe not the 18th. So does that sound like a good day for the second day in January? The 20th versus...
Yeah, I mean, I hate to bring people and staff in on a holiday unless we have to.
Okay.
And it's also, I don't want to, I want to respect that holiday if we can.
Thank you, Pat.
Okay, so we'll plan on those for January, the 6th and 20th, and then we try to identify 2 here in February. Well, there's 4 days: Wednesday the 3rd, Monday the 15th, which is President's Day, which we actually, that's a holiday for us as well. It's the one that confuses me. We don't do some holidays, but we get President's Day. So, and again, we'll probably be here anyway, so that doesn't matter to me.
So can I just ask about
For that day.
Let him can you just finish
it's about
the
what's our
other?
business after we've issued the draft report for public comment? What are we doing? Are those,
Additional revisions based upon public comment.
okay.
And
So we're
just
gonna-
trying to get days if we need them. If we can.
But are these dates for people to come and give us their feedback?
No, this would be incorporating the feedback that we received into the report.
We're not having.
We'll
a
probably
forum.
get some public comment. We'll slap our heads and say, why didn't we think of that already?
Yeah.
And we'll have to do some work.
Yeah.
That's what I envision happening. I no disrespect to everybody here, but I'm sure there are some ideas out there that we're just going, why didn't we think of that?
Yep.
And why haven't we thought through that?
So I want to allow a full month for that. I also don't want us to keep procrastinating, and finally decide we have to meet 6 times in February. I don't want to do that. So I think we just schedule our meetings. We allow a couple meetings in February to deal with, probably one to deal with the public comment, and then the final meeting would probably be some sort of a final reading and blessing, I think.
Toast.
The toast.
I guess what I was thinking about was what's going to allow the public to have access to give us their feedback, and if it's just going to be one of our meetings, or is it some additional meeting?
Well-
6:30 to 8:30, the right time for public comment.
No, I
The Horizon
think,
2020 committee kind of did this double meeting so that it hit people that were available during the day, people at the end of the, sort of in the evening. And that was to accommodate, and we basically sat there waiting for public to comment during both those periods. The second meeting time in the evening, no one attended. I mean, one, I think, person attended. It was pretty much most people came at the 4 o'clock meeting. And so if we're not going to give the public a time, then it doesn't matter. But if we're trying to say, this is the meeting for you to come and tell us what you think of our report.
I was thinking of more written comment. Maybe I'm all wet there, but I know with some, like one of the revisions of a chapter of Horizon 2020, I was able to comment in writing, and then we'd be reviewing.
Yeah, that was sort of the only way to give comment during most of the process, but when the issues action report was presented for public review, then it was 2 sessions back to back with a 1 hour, maybe a half hour or 1 hour break for dinner.
Are we ever going to publicize what we're doing in our work? We talked about that early on.
Now, let's just finish this conversation, and then we
Let's
can
do
go
that.
to that one.
Okay.
All right, well, I think what Charlie's saying is, does it make sense to schedule a meeting for public comment?
Maybe a different time. Well, I was
Or at the
surprised.
same time.
I was surprised there were so many people that showed up to the earlier session for Horizon 2020, and then didn't show up for the later one. And then,
What we can have an additional time. We can have one of these days in February, the 15th, 17th, 3rd, whatever. I think we need to get the report first and then maybe decide, we're just trying to reserve some days before we can do that. We can have one of these meetings be the public comment for in the evening, and if we feel like an additional public comments needed during the day, we can have that. We can schedule that separately. I haven't looked at times during the day, so we can maybe have that discussion
But we
at the
would
next
need to
meeting.
have it early enough in the process so that,
good time to.
that we would have time to incorporate it into
Like the February
report,
3rd.
so.
Why I jumped in and interrupted you is the February 3rd date was like, where are we asking that? We just issued the report and we've passed 2 weeks and we're not asking for the public to come and tell us what they think. So they're going to need some time to read it, study it, to bring it to their various group meetings. You know, Land will probably look at this and have some comment. I mean, that's when people started getting engaged, and I'm just imagining those people feeling like we're rushing them if they're not given sufficient time, you know.
So how would you propose that we make our deadline?
No, I'm just realizing that that public period is not just to send it and wait for people to email us. So unless that's what we want, I'm just thinking about
There's always an option to do an open house type format like you did last time, where you put up your recommendations kind of in a public format where you
In the setting.
are also doing some Q&A with people also
That's what
as an
I was wondering
educational
about.
opportunity besides just comment collecting.
Okay.
we didn't have great attendance for that. I don't know. I mean,
Well, let me just point
it wasn't
out
bad.
that on Wednesday, February the 3rd, Kansas State is playing KU at Allen Fieldhouse. Just,
No,
I don't know that'd be the right night for public comment.
So that would be, people would interpret that in their.
I don't know, maybe that's why the room's available. Don't know. But
Smart thinking. It's probably not the night for public comment.
what was the other date we had there, 15th? 15th, Oklahoma State's in town, 8 PM.
What day?
And
Oh,
it's
the
also
Monday?
The
the holiday.
15th.
That's the holiday.
That's, yeah, but
So then the 17th, would that be the day?
Well, the 15th, everyone can make it. The 17th, Dee and Pat indicated. they
Now you're
couldn't
back
make
on
it.
January, right?
No, I'm
Oh,
in
okay.
February,
Sorry,
the
sorry.
17th. So that, when we looked at the two that week, 15th was President's Day, but everyone could make it. The 17th, two folks couldn't. So there's no reason to have both meetings. So if one or the other, if we want just to set aside, we can set aside both of them at this point and then figure that out later. Maybe that's the best thing to do. I'm just trying to reserve rooms and schedule, so.
How about, Dave, how about you go ahead and schedule the January 6th and the January 20th? And then I'll visit with you and we'll talk about if we need to open up some other dates or figure out a public meeting time, and may have to go back out to you with another poll with some additional dates for February.
It's a good idea.
We'll look at the KU schedule.
Look at the Katie schedule.
It's important.
if we're trying to make it open as many
Let me
people as
ask this,
possible.
I think Adam was the one before who couldn't get here until 6:30. So now that he's gone, is there anybody who couldn't start, say, at 6? Because one option is to move our time up a little bit, and then if there's a later game start time, we could maybe accommodate that. 5:30, is that pushing it for anybody?
Depends on the week.
5:45? All right, well, we'll keep that in mind. We'll try to get something that works for as many people as possible, but we'll have to come back to that.
Can I follow up on my comment?
Yes.
I was trying to address Charlie's feedback. It would be nice if people knew what they were talking about before they gave us input. And so I'm thinking this is where we need some kind of PR, like we discussed early on.
Okay. We'll make note of that. And talk with Megan Gilliland about it.
What we may do is have a city manager type update or say where we're at in the process, and maybe that can go along with the draft report in mid-January when we get to that point that we can get that sent out to folks and get that, maybe that draft out and get that notification out. Sometimes that's a good way to get it out, that people pick up on it, the media and others.
If it's at a city commission meeting?
If it's an update, well, if it could be part of the city manager report, or we send it out, I don't know what.
We can get it posted and have it, I mean, we get a lot
Do a
of.
press release.
Yeah, you do.
You'll get some
So-
news, you'll get some news attention, I think, if you do a
20,
press release.
I mean, you just send it out there, and there's a lot of people. And Megan's got a huge, as soon as you do something like that, she tweets 50,000 people or something. And they all, get it.
Yep.
So are we gonna do that with the draft report, or are you thinking
Okay, the draft
before?
report.
I think when we release a draft, it's going to be important to get some media attention then, so people know to comment. And it also, and I think what Carol's point is, you're getting people ready. If you're informing them along the way, then when the final recommendations come out, it's not a big surprise. And I agree with you on that.
So you said January 15 as a target date for the draft to be done, which is a Friday?
That's not fixed in stone. It could be the 20th.
Okay.
I don't know.
I'm just thinking on the 20th, then that's your deadline for getting stuff on the city manager's report. Is that Wednesday, or is it the next day on Thursday? I like the idea of it getting on the city manager's report as soon as possible.
2 weeks, it's like Thursday, 2 weeks out.
Well, we just gotta know that.
For
it's there.
that, it could be a week before
But it would
on
have to be
Thursday.
for sure done by the week before.
Right.
So the Wednesday, the 20th, getting it done that night. or the next morning, if any of the final touches. Gets it on manager's report on the 26th, on Tuesday, the 26th.
Yeah, but we need to know the week before the 20th that
That
you're
it's
gonna,
gonna
that
make-
that's the plan, because they, yeah.
We'll work on that and discuss it maybe at the next meeting, what the best strategy is for getting it out.
All right. Yeah, public comment?
You just referred to not getting to an item, citizen advisory recommendation. What is that?
One of the recommendations that we did not get to and discuss tonight is a possible recommendation to consolidate a couple of the current advisory groups that serve the city commission into a new group that maybe also would have some new members to try to bring pedestrian and bicycle issues together.
Right, I understand.
Sure. Anything else? All right. Unless there's any other business, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Charlie, second.
Second.
By Mike, all in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Are you available to speak?